Ladies and gentlemen, honorable guests, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the Women's Summit organized by Shirkat Women's Resource Center in partnership with the Punjab Standing Committee on Gender Mainstreaming and Women's Development, Global Affairs Canada, UN Women and the World Bank. This summit is part of Canada's ongoing support for women's political participation in Pakistan and the FemPower project led by Shirkat. For a formal welcome to the summit, I would now invite our first speaker, Honorable Uzma Kardar Saiba. She has actively participated in mainstream politics for over 25 years, is a member of the Punjab Assembly and chairperson for the Standing Committee on Gender Mainstreaming and Women's Development. Over to you, Uzma Saiba.
Thank you so much, Arshad. And it's an honor to have all our partners, Shirkat, World Bank, Canadian High Commission, UN Women. They have shown their commitment to this cause of gender equality and women empowerment and are with us today. I'm delighted to have Najee, Mendy, and Farida with us because I think they are really very accomplished and our partners for a long time in this cause. Now, coming to the Women's Summit, this is a very important dialogue for change, number two, impact, and then policy. First, I would like to talk about PM Imran Khan's vision in our PTI government. He sees Pakistan where women are politically, socially, and economically empowered. And the same vision is being endorsed in Punjab by the Chief Minister through pro-women policies and decision-making. Now, the Gender Mainstreaming Committee has been consistently working with national and international partners towards a Punjab where we can give an enabling environment, where we can give equal opportunities, where we can have supportive policies for financial inclusion of women in the workforce and to empower them. In the last 2 years, the Gender Mainstreaming Standing Committee has made several interventions to improve the lives of women and girls in Punjab on the legislative front and also on the front of policy making. As far as legislation is concerned, it's very important to mention that we have been actively lobbying for the Child Marriage Restraint Act, and it has now been owned by the government and in the pipeline. Secondly, the Asset Control Act, that is also there. This is the first time that for the transgenders, we have brought in a bill in the National Assembly, and now it is with the HR Ministry in Punjab, and it's in the pipeline. So all these interventions, are being made. And then for child legislation, we have Zainab Alert bill. We've been working on that as well. And the maternity leave enhancement for women, we've been working on that bill. And the best news is that the domestic workers bill has already been passed by the Punjab Assembly. And there's a large segment of women who work as domestic help, so they will now be covered. And the home-based workers bill has now been approved by the cabinet and will be brought to the floor of the House. And let me just mention here that there are about 12 million home-based women workers, and these people need some kind of legislative protection and security protection so that they can be part of the documented economy of Pakistan. Now, it is important to also mention that as chair of Gender Mainstreaming Standing Committee, we have brought on board all development partners to ensure that gender mainstreaming remains at the top of the agenda in Punjab. Let us now come to COVID. COVID has changed the whole world, but the people who have been worst affected in the COVID situation are children and women. There are many women who have not just suffered economically, but also socially and emotionally. plus mentally. So for them, the psychosocial support system was set up through the platform of a Gender Mainstreaming Standing Committee, which collaborated with PDMA and all the UN agencies, plus the humanitarian organizations. And they put together sectoral working groups in which in many departments of Punjab government, their staff was trained to cope with the COVID situation and how to extend help to these people who are now, especially women who are stranded at home, who are under stress, who have to do double the amount of work that they were doing before, and how to reach out to them. So this was, I think the DG will also explain later on in one of the panels what all we have managed to achieve on that front. Now, the government did include women as top priority in the social protection program like EHSAS. But many lost their livelihoods. Now in Punjab, the workforce of the women in the workforce was 36%. Out of this 36%, 43%, you'll be amazed, was in the rural areas, and only 24% in the urban areas. Now the women in the rural areas mostly are undocumented. They're doing a lot of work, but you know, we don't know about them. So we need to extend legislation in the rural areas to give them social protection so that they can become part of the formal economy, because they work in the fields, they work at home, but they don't have any legal cover. So we really have to work a lot to in that direction also. In this particular summit, which is very, very important, we're going to touch upon political participation, inclusive policy making, disaster management plans. Now, the main purpose is to enhance gender responsive plans to rehabilitate all these people after COVID. Then we must evaluate their skill setup, how we can create policy systems to improve the future of women's work. In this dialogue, we can also help create enabling policies. This is make systems which support women at the grassroots level, especially to improve participation of women in informal workforce, enhance their digital skills, and last but not least, create a violence-free, gender equal and inclusive space where all genders can thrive in future Pakistan. And after brainstorming with all the experts who are sitting here, you know, with us and all in all the panels, we will come up with a substantial way forward for this to create this gender equality, especially the generational equality, the inclusive future for everybody. You know, because no country can progress without gender parity. There can be no enhancement of any kind unless the whole of the population gets equal opportunity to move forward and you know, contribute to the GDP of a country. And thank you once again, and I really look forward to all our honorable speakers. Over to you now, Arshad. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Uzma Saiba, for presenting the government's commitment and vision for women's advancement and highlighting some very important interventions and recommendations for COVID times. I now invite Her Excellency, Ms. Wendy Gilmore, the Canadian High Commissioner to Pakistan, to share her thoughts. Ms. Gilmore has worked in the Canadian Foreign Service for 20 years with postings in Zimbabwe, the United Kingdom, and Nigeria. Prior to arriving in Islamabad in 2018, she was previously the Director General for Trade and Export Controls at the headquarters of Global Affairs Canada. Over to you, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Arshad, and hello to everybody today. I think Arshad's being very kind. He says, I've been in the Foreign Service for 20 years. It's actually been 31 years, and I'm not that I'm counting at this point. But listen, what a wonderful opportunity to be online with all of you this morning, and an incredibly important topic. And I'm so pleased that Canada is able to work directly with many of you through the Women's Political Participation Project, and Shirkat in particular. So Farida, I see you at the top of my screen. It's lovely to see you this morning. this is an incredibly important area. I've talked with many people, and we've done a lot of thinking and really understanding about the importance of having women at the decision table in every decision-making fora. And that starts from understanding and education on civil and political rights, right from school children to registration of women so that they are able to participate in the democratic process, through to how do we encourage women to get involved in grassroots politics, in party politics, to stand for office, Uzma, as you have and many of your colleagues, and then to ultimately, once in the seats of power in the decision-making fora, to be able to exercise an effective voice. And it's a challenge that exists not only here in Pakistan, but frankly around the world. Even in Canada, we have not reached anywhere close to parity in our political offices. We're better than we used to be, but it's still not where we should be representative according to the population. And when we look at the numbers here in Pakistan, it's even that much more glaring how much there is to do to ensure equitable representation for women. It really does start from the straight knowledge of the electoral process and the understanding of the need for representative democracy, and holding our decision makers to account for the political platforms that they're bringing to the table, and getting not just, and I think there's sometimes always a discussion getting women's issues on the table, but getting issues related to family and society. And there is no question but that a diversity of views helps in this process. People with different lived experience bring those experiences to the table and are therefore able to ensure that the issues get addressed. And that's something which is absolutely critical. In the Elections Act 2017, I know that we've been supporting a number of organizations that were working to bring this act to fruition. We were working very hard as one of our previous program in the establishment of a gender unit in the Elections Commission of Pakistan. What I see now, what I encourage my colleagues here at the High Commission and elsewhere in the development community, is to make sure that these elements get put into practice. Having the legislation and the frameworks is just the first step. Making them work is really where the hard work stands. To do that, and I'm wonderful to see Naji online and a number of others, but we need our male champions of change. We need them both in the development community. We also need them more broadly in Pakistan and amongst elected officials and amongst civil society and amongst the general population. It needs to be normalized to see women in powerful positions. Pakistan, as a university student and as a young member of the Foreign Service in the early 1990s, we were all very aware of Pakistan as one of I think the first country in the Muslim world to have a woman as an elected head of government. And, granted, it was a dynastic political process that perhaps put her there, but the fact that she was there was a beacon for the rest of the world, including in Canada and elsewhere. It's just unfortunate that we haven't seen more women follow in her wake in key leadership positions. But that starts from getting a broad-based participation right from the get-go in the electoral process and up through. We've had only, I would just as a side note, we've had a woman prime minister in Canada. I think it was something for like 27 days in the run up to an election, and we haven't since. So frankly, we need to do our own part to get women back into into the positions of power. We have at the moment a deputy prime minister in Canada, which is an appointed position, but directly elected as a member of parliament. But there's a lot to go around the world. I look at our colleagues in the Nordic countries who have achieved closer to parity. I think Finland right now is perhaps even over parity in the number of women in cabinet positions. The fact that we remark on that is something that at my age I would like to have thought was more the norm, but we still are trying to get there in so many different societies. We're going to hear later this morning, I think, from more people than me that can speak to some of the challenges that are particular to Pakistan about getting women into political office and into the political process. I can say maybe just a few words I was up in Gilgit in, oh good Lord, before the elections. I think it was in early October. And we were speaking to a number of women that were in political party activism in Gilgit, talking about how representation was being supported in what is, you know, a regional election, and some disappointment from some of the women that we spoke to about how women were selected for the lists that are then put up by the parties, and how in some cases the perception is that the women that are put on lists are unrepresentative of the women that they're supposed to be addressing. So I'd be really interested to hear from people about how in a proportional based system where we have, especially for the reserve seats for women, there are lists put together by the political parties, how we can connect the women on those lists better with the electoral base, with the people who are voting. The other thing we heard from the women that we were speaking to when we were up there is in the course of the campaign, there wasn't that much opportunity to actually hear from the different political parties on their platforms and the policies that they were going to be addressing. And you know, why the electorate should vote for one group over another, really it should be based on the substance that they are bringing to the electoral process. And so generally trying to encourage political participation to be more participatory and responsive to the needs of the voters is also something that could encourage women generally to get involved, because they see then the direct action that will result from their participation. So that's something I'd be very interested to hear this morning. The other thing, of course, to keep in mind, and I face just a tiny piece of this with my very limited social presence, social policy or public, oh good Lord, social network presence is the word I'm looking for here in Pakistan. But I am acutely aware that women in prominent positions, both in Pakistan and around the world, face online a particular form of harassment which is insidious. And it is a barrier to entry for people that want to enter into public life. So one of the things that I'm interested in trying to understand and to hear from some of the elected officials and others that we're going to hear from this morning is, how can we make the public sphere a friendlier and more welcoming space for women to participate? Whether that's the presence on social media, some of the vitriol that's directed specifically at women. Journalists also face this every day in a manner in which is not replicated by their male counterparts. Female politicians in particular attract a level of vitriol in societies, again, in Canada and elsewhere, that's disproportionate to what is faced by men. So how we can address that collectively, how we can create safe space for women to participate, will also increase the numbers and nature of that participation. I'm going to stop there because I know we have a lot of people to hear from this morning, and really look forward to having as much of a dialogue as we can given the electronic platform and means. But again, a wonderful initiative, and thank you very much for having me this morning.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for sharing your thoughts on empowering women, your observations on Pakistan, and your important recommendations for future work. Our next speaker is Mr. Naji Ben Hassim, Country Director for Pakistan and the South Asia region at the World Bank Group. Prior to this position, Mr. Ben Hassim was the Regional Director for the Middle East and North Africa region for Equitable Growth, Finance and Institutions, and before that served as Director for Finance, Competitiveness and Innovation Global Practice. Over to you, Mr. Naji.
Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. Really happy to be here. And thank you for inviting me. And I'm pleased to see every one of you and to come after Wendy. So I'll take you through a few numbers, but let me at the outset not only say that the World Bank in our engagements are definitely engaged and committed to increase gender equality in Pakistan, but more than that, going forward for our new country partnership framework, basically our 5-year programming exercise, we're starting the discussions now. we would like, I mean, the discussions are just starting now. I would like the first topic and the first issue to focus on to be girls' education. Among 4 priorities of our new country partnership framework, I would like to increase our investments, increase our support with a very focused, with a great focus on girls' schooling, especially in primary school and also secondary school and the transition between the two. I wanted to start with that because often we tend to be focused on gender equality, but it can sometimes be not an afterthought, but like a disaggregated indicator, like improving schooling, and then we disaggregate it between girls and boys. While the solutions to increase girls' education can differ slightly from the general interventions. So in this case, we would like to have an explicit focus on girls' education. Boys will benefit as well, of course, but I wanted to say this at the outset, and that's an area that we would like to significantly increase our interventions and presence. I don't think I need to convince anyone of the potential of how much closing the gender gap in Pakistan on the economic part, but there's other areas, of course, is absolutely huge. In fact, our colleagues at the IMF estimated recently that the GDP of Pakistan could increase by 30% if the gender gap in terms of female labor force participation could be reduced. But of course, there's huge challenges. Nearly 8.6 million girls are today enrolled in primary school compared to 10.7 million boys. So you can, this gives you a sense of the gap. And enrollment rates in secondary school for females is at 34.1%. Frankly, when I came, I'm new to the program, when I came to Pakistan and I saw this number, I was tempted to do just that. Let's just focus on getting more girls to continue after primary education and to enter secondary education. When 2/3 of girls don't finish secondary education and just stop before the 5th or 6th grade, then the impacts on well-being, the impacts on long-term growth, the impacts on women are just huge, and this is absolutely unacceptable of a number, if I could put it this way, for a country like Pakistan. And let alone the big issue of child marriage or before 18 years old marriage is linked to school dropout. And so the impact of improving these outcomes is absolutely crucial, and I would put it as our very first priority in our next program. And it's not, in many countries we hear it's not an easy problem to solve. There's social norms, it is true, but there are basics in terms of access, in terms of water and sanitation in schools, in terms of density of secondary schools and primary schools, especially in rural areas. There are basics that need to be there. Then there can be a residual due to social norms, family preferences, poverty, and the need to have the girls stay home, early marriage, and many factors that can reduce school attendance by girls. But the basics are still not there in terms of just the sheer number of schools and access, and water and sanitation is another big area where research has shown that that this contributes to parents deciding not to send their girls to school after primary school. So huge challenge in Pakistan, but what needs to be done is broadly known, at least in terms of access and supporting the poor to send their girls to school and to keep them there. And let me give you the example, and I was very pleased to see that the SS program was expanding into a conditional cash transfer program for girls, and there's discussions now potentially to have even a bonus for girls that end their primary school, and they would the mother would receive that bonus on the first day of entry in secondary school, to ensure that there is, to incentivize a bit more this transition. So we're very pleased with this development of the Ihsas program into girls education in general, but girls in particular, as well as nutrition. We intend to support it with a new operation that is under discussion now, and we hope to support it massively over the coming years, because these are the things that have proven to have impact around the world. There's a few things in development that we know and we have sufficient evidence on. Not many things, but this one is something we know works, giving cash incentives with higher premia for girls, for families, especially mothers, to keep their girls in school, is something that we have seen works in many different contexts. So we will definitely support that. The second topic that I wanted to mention which is harder, is female labor force participation. Just entering the job market. The numbers have improved a bit, especially in rural area, and it's mostly driven by agriculture. The big challenge is in urban areas. What do you do to increase these rates, which are desperately low, and they're actually flat in urban areas for the past years? That's an area that's not that easy in terms of it. I mean, we don't have ready-made solutions or interventions around the world that have proven to work in every context. This, for me, is really a question mark. What can be done? Is it about safety in transport? Is it about social norms? Is it about equal pay? Is it about is the problem with education itself? If the education outcomes are so low, then you wouldn't expect too much jobs available. But it is an area we would like to understand better, to see what can work and what. And you've mentioned home-based workers. Yes, this is a huge part of the economy. We are working actually now with the 4 provinces on improving the regulatory framework so that home-based workers, women in particular, can register, which could give them increased access to markets. Our experience around the world on this is that it relates a little bit to the point Wendy made on implementation. Improving the legal framework and regulations is important, but it's really a starting point. Whether implementation, whether behavior will change, and whether women will be able to make use of that registration in the marketplace is something to be seen. I don't think it's a silver bullet, but it is a first step. Last but not least, and Wendy mentioned political participation, I want to end with this. I mentioned our increased and support to the Ihsas program, and there's a graduate student that just published her thesis on the impact of cash transfers of the BISP program on women, because mothers really receive it. And we invited her at a webinar last week, a brilliant grad student from Islamabad. And she finds very solid evidence on just cash transfers to mothers over the years, increasing mobility, increasing political participation and voting, increasing control over resources, and this is after 3-4 years, 5 years of the program. So it's just I want to finish on this positive note. These are effects we've seen in other countries, and they are confirmed in Pakistan. It works. You give means and cash transfers to women in the first quintile and the poorer ones, it empowers them. I'm not saying this is a silver bullet for every issues and to reduce all gender gaps that are out there, but I want to emphasize the fact that we have one program that works, that's proven to have impact, and it's being expanded to issues like maternal health, nutrition, and education. So it's very promising as a platform to intervene for the government in this crucial area. Let me end here so that we can have more of an exchange in the discussion that follows, and very much looking forward to that. Over. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your very valuable insights on girls' education and employment and economic empowerment, the challenges around these, and the direct link of these to economic growth and other development indicators. We now have our final speaker for this session, Farida Shahid, Executive Director of Shirkat Women's Resource Center. She's recipient of several national and international human rights awards and has spent a lifetime promoting and protecting the rights of women, girls, and other marginalized people in Pakistan and abroad. She's also the former UN Special Rapporteur for Cultural Rights. Over to you, Farida.
Thank you. And let me start by thanking everyone, all our partners, for making time for this very quickly put together summit, but which I think is really important. And perhaps in COVID, that's what we need to do, respond immediately as fast as we can with whoever is there. You know, with every disaster, they say, comes a great opportunity. And perhaps this is the opportunity to rethink and to use this summit as a way of kicking off thinking on how we can move forward, how we can build better, and how to ensure that Punjab, and of course we hope Pakistan, is violence-free, gender equal and inclusive, meaning all the other intersectionalities that come in, depending on your religion, depending on where you are based, urban, rural, etc., etc. So that you really have no one left behind, which is what the Agenda 2030 actually says. COVID-19 is a huge challenge. We did just completed a research for the UN Women, which shows the interlocking of the shadow pandemic with the loss of livelihood, with the kind of gender-specific roles that have become normalized. And the domestic violence, I have to say, is not just gender-based, it is also generational-based. So you get a lot of children at the receiving end of what's happening, but certainly these different areas of loss of livelihood, what it does to women, and women who've lost their livelihood, plus those who have not. So men lost their livelihood, but that's what happened, and they were left feeling less manly, I guess, in a sense, because they were unable to fulfill society's role. Whereas for women, their work at home doubled, tripled, and those who were working and lost their jobs also, in many cases, lost their status within their own homes. So I think this is really important. And one of the missing areas for me was the lack of the local government. The local government in terms of COVID response would have been so crucial. And so I'm hoping that our parliamentarians will take this forward and try and push for local government. I think we need women's voices, obviously, for the response and recovery. And at the moment, let's be clear, we have something like maybe 5.5% of the people making decisions about COVID response and recovery are women. So it's really insufficient. So FemPower of Pakistan, let me just say that in terms of women's political empowerment, we don't see this as just limited to the electoral process. And I think Her Excellency said something along the same lines. But to us, this means that every woman everywhere is able to express what's in their hearts and their minds without fear, whether that is creatively as artistic expression or scientific expression or however, and at home and in public. And secondly, it means every woman everywhere has the right to demand accountability. They have the right to make not just informed choices. Women have to make and determine what the choices in our societies are, and that's not happening. Their decisions need to be respected, and we don't see that. And we need to make sure that their voices are heard from the home to the global agenda setting area and arena. And so it's not just and finally, to occupy space, public spaces without fear of punitive action. As Her Excellency said, this is really normalizing women's presence everywhere in every public space. For us, democracy, of course, will always start from home. So very quickly, if I can just do some responding to the previous speakers, in particular, I think if I look at the political participation, one of the things that has always struck me, ages ago, we did a research and we asked women whether they were interested in politics or what they talked about. So they were not interested in politics, But what were they talking about? Oh, they were talking about Kashmir, they were talking about Afghanistan, they were talking X, Y, and Z. So we said, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. You're not interested in politics, but this is what you're discussing. Their answer was because whoever is elected locally makes no difference to our lives. And that is where that link has to be established. That accountability has to come in, which is why I think local government is so very important. What we, as we're saying, as Usman's saying, you know, the first thing is making the legal framework. Then there's the hard part of making it implemented. And so this is why under the FemPower project, we are bringing in post-legislative scrutiny, which we hope will be able to at least give a tool to assess what goes wrong. Why does it go wrong? Because the parliament is sitting there passing the framework, but why does it not translate onto the ground? We have a lot of laws, but they don't seem to change women's lives. And for that, we hope to move that forward. We have talked about how to make women stronger, and I hope our parliamentarians will talk about what needs to happen for them to stand as general candidates and not in reserved seats. That is the sea change that we need to happen, so that you're not coming just on the reserved seats, but coming in directly. So we have proposed in the past 33% candidacy, not seats, so that everyone has to put up female candidates wherever they are on a rotating basis. We have also contemplated having 2 votes for women as well, so that the accountability is there. But of course, women don't have economic power, and that is a big issue in terms of standing for political office. So just to say a few things regarding education, I completely agree with the country director, Mr. Ben Hassin.